Hey everybody, what up? Scuffy here, and I woke up from a strange inebriated state on my floor, passed out. I don't know how it happened, and I was inspired. I was inspired to talk, do a little training cage action. This one's going to be a little abstract, so bear with me. We want to talk about meta. What is meta? Meta is a term that might get tossed around a lot. This is more an educational for those who may not be superiorly familiar with card game terms or gaming terms in general. What is a meta? Because if you play tabletop game, you might be familiar as far as what that term and that concept means. If you play card games, other card games besides Horus Heresy Legions, you might be familiar with that term. As I understand it, as I define it, as I relate to it, I want to kind of explain what meta is and kind of educate. So this is kind of something that goes along the lines of kind of like what we talked about with regards to mid-range control, aggro. Those are terms, those are educational videos to kind of educate what those concepts are. Well, what is meta? Meta as a concept, meta in the game. And as I said, this is going to be a little abstract, so you're going to have to bear with me because meta is a living thing. And it can mean two different things ultimately. There's what is the meta being what is the current state of the game, what is the mechanic, deck type, archetype, build focus that is driving the consistent win play. Basically, what is cranking out here in the top 50? You know, what decks, what builds are truly being used to crank out these points. I mean, not just top 50. Top 50 are using them more than others because they're playing more than others. And then what is metagaming? Metagaming is a very important concept and term, and it's something that a lot of people need to understand, and it's part of playing a game. Is and there's a hint within the game, as if you're waiting for a game up to queue, there's a hint there that it kind of offers some insight as far as what is metagaming. So let's try to discuss those two things here. In the most basic, simplest terms, the meta. Let's talk about the meta. The meta is like I said, what is the driving dominant deck types? What are the things that are basically your top levels, your top tiers? And when I say top tier, tier 1, tier 0, whatever you want to call it, that's your usually 2 to 3 decks that are just everybody's playing them because they win more than others, and they're either playing them because they win more than others, or they're playing them because, basically because they win more than others. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. That's why they're top tier. That's why they're top tier. That's why they're hard to beat, baby. And that's why people play them. And that is your top level. Then you've got your tier 1.5 ish, and those are decks that can function fairly well. In the same regard, they have some majority of their matchups are very good, but at the same time, they do have some struggle against those top tier decks. Basically, your rank 4s and 5 decks, and then you've got your second level tier. Let's just say tier 2. And tier 2 are those other decks that, again, you can win with, but at a certain point you're going to just have a harder time with the matchups of those warlords that are ranks 1 through 5. It doesn't mean that wins can't happen. You can get lucky, but those are going to be those ones where it's just really frustrating facing this warlord every time. Well, then you might be having yourself a tier 2 to a tier 1 matchup, and then you've got, I don't know how to go any more depth into it. There might be tier 3 and tier 4, but let's just, for the sake of nature, let's just say there's tier 3. So we've got 4 tiers. We've got tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, and tier 3. And tier 3 is essentially the warlords that just are not great. They're weak. They weaken a lot of matchups. They're very very low supported. They're not fun to play. You can win with them. You can win with anything in the game. Honestly, you really can. If you play it long enough and you play it hard enough and you work your deck, you can win with anything in the game, but it's hard to win consistently with them at a rate that is ever going to net you enough points to get into Terra, or let alone the top 50. The top 50, that's just not going to happen. Your top, your examples of those kinds of decks. And again, people play these, and there's nothing wrong with playing them, but they might understand the hardships. So you've got your Shabber and Dar, Thaddeus Fail currently because of how terrible they butchered his. They butchered him. Ingathil, Nemetor. These are warlords that don't see play very often. Ingopek, for good reason. For good reason. They just their abilities, their pool, the way they play compared to everything else in the game, it's why play that? Why play that? I mean, even if Loken is better than your deck, then you're not your tier 2 deck. That's tier 3. Sorry, tier 3. Did I say tier 3? Tier 1, tier 1.5, tier 2, tier 3. Yeah, tier 3. Okay. All right. But the meta shifts all the time, and that's why it's so abstract. That's why it's kind of hard to just say that's what it is, and here's these decks that are what's 1 through 5, what's everything below that. It changes, and if you play the game long enough, if you're familiar with the game or any game in general, what is dominant changes often. It fluctuates. That is the meta. That is the nature of the meta. The meta evolves, and that's good. That's healthy for the game. Do not get me wrong. That is a very important concept, because if it remains stale, if your top decks, if your top warlords, if your top mechanics or concepts are consistently winning forever, there's a glass ceiling there. There's a wall that disengages the players at a certain point. It's just not fun to play against. Many people would say the Thousand Suns psych or energy kind of is pushing that barrier right now at this moment as of August 10th, 11:41 p.m. Take that as you will. Take that as you will. But there's a certain point where it has to fluctuate, it has to evolve, because otherwise players don't want to play. And then you have a game that is not fun. You have a game that you lose players. Then ultimately what that comes down to is you end up not having a player base for your game, and then you don't have a game. In a collectible card game, that's half the nature, is new cards. New cards create new content, create new factions, new mechanics and such. So that in of itself drives the meta to evolve. If you are talking within a play group, and granted, Legions has one server. You can play players from all over the world, all parts of the globe, at all different hours of the day. So you're not getting just one isolated play group and another isolated play group, but within each of those play groups in different parts of the world, Russian players might build decks generally in one certain faction. They might do it in and therefore have kind of their own little meta as far as what their top preferred decks are. That doesn't mean that they're terribly unsimilar from what the rest of the world is facing. As Spain players might have much the same in a different regard. It might still consist of the same top 3, but it may be in different percentages. For instance, it's very possible, and I'm just throwing out Warlords here right now. It's been about 3 weeks since we've had a Q&A. Generally, one of the questions that all the players ask in the Q&A is, what are the top warlords? Where warlords are seeing the most play as well as the most wins, and it helps us gauge what the meta is. Not that we don't have a fairly good understanding from it, especially if you're a top 50 player, you know what you're playing the most against. You can take a look at your battle sheet, your battle report, and see what warlords are you playing against the most, what are you winning against the most and not. But to hear it directly from Everguild, what is winning, kind of helps just confirm our suspicions. So let's just say that right now, I keep hitting the wrong key. Go back. It's late. It's late. I woke up. I'm sleepy, but I'm not sleepy. You ever have those times? You ever have those times where you like wake up and you should be sleeping, but your mind is wildly awake? I don't know what kind of dream I had. I just woke up and I was like, I need this. I need to do this. I have a mission. But let's just say, stream of consciousness. Good grief. Let's just say the top 3 warlords right now are Magnus, who I need to rebuild my deck because I have one empty deck slot, and that is reserved for Magnus, baby. That is reserved for the big red. Big red. But let's just say you've got Magnus as your 1. You've got Leman Russ as your 2. And let's just say he's not here, but let's just say Constantine Valdor. Now, they're the newest warlords, but let's just say those are your top 3. I don't think Valdor is a top 3, though. Honestly, I think Phosis Takar, with the changes that they've just made to him, he could easily make his way back up into the top 3. If not Phosis Takar, I think it's possible that we would see Alfarius in that 3rd spot. But let's just say, for the sake of good talk, Leman Russ, Magnus the Red, and Constantine Valdor are your top 3. Well, it's very possible that Magnus gets played a lot by 60% of the players in Russia, but only 30% of the players in Spain. Whether that is because 30% of the players in Spain don't have access to, or have access to him and the others don't, and vice versa with the Russian players or the U.S. players or Germany, England, wherever you are in the world, that can vary. And that can, if you had a local meta, your local play group or your lodge, basically, if you're playing games against your lodge members, that could dictate what your local meta is. But in the shape of the global, those are still the top 3. Those are still the 3 warlords that are ultimately your top level warlords, and so you get it from there. To kind of relate, let's say you had a card game, a physical card game, Magic the Gathering, or I don't know, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, I don't know, whatever you play. You go to your shop consistently all the time. Your players at the shop are playing, X, Y, and Z deck. They're playing, Red Burn, basically. That's the hot thing to do. I don't know what sets are out currently in Magic. I don't really care. But let's just say, for the sake of nature, that that's the hot thing to do. Everybody's playing that. Okay, that's your local meta. Well, it turns out you go to a bigger tournament in another town, a regional qualifier or some such like that, and it turns out that your Red Burn deck is not at all what's popular, what's being played. That kind of highlights how a meta can shift. How not shift, a meta can be isolated. The meta fluctuates. Your local meta is completely irrelevant and not at all an indicator of what the national meta might actually be. Now, in today's day and age with the internet and deck lists and net decking and stuff, that's much harder to do, but it's not entirely impossible. What drives the meta? As we kind of touched on, it is very possible that part of what drives the meta is card access. Players who do not have access to your legendary warlords, your Leman Russ, your Magnus the Red, your Constantine Valdor, let's just say, again, going with those examples, that those are the top 3, they can't play that. So they go to what's next. What's the next thing to do? Let's just say you've got a lodge, your lodge. None of you guys have a legendary warlord. What is your next go-to? You still want to play Space Wolves, or you still want to play a faction that is extremely dominant. Thousand Suns, for example, well, I don't have Magnus the Red, so I will play Phosis Takar. Phosis Takar then takes that slot. He still follows within the same mechanics and concepts. He's still utilizing the card pool, although a Phosis Takar deck doesn't necessarily do that, but he's using Psychic Energy for the barriers, so in a way he's using a mechanic. And so that becomes your option, your avenue. In terms of your lodge, that might be what's top, because that's really what you've got access to. Does that mean that you can't beat what, if you come across a Magnus deck, a Phosis versus Magnus? That's an interesting matchup. But that doesn't mean that it's not unwinnable. However, that's not the point. The point isn't that you chose to go with Phosis. It's that you didn't have the choice to go with Magnus, so you took Phosis. And then in that nature, that drives it. If we had everybody in the game, and here's a perfect example of it. What was it, 2 months ago, when they put out Father's Day? Father's Day was June. 2 months ago, they put out Horus. Warlord Horus Lupercal was in the shop. And they did the same thing with Alfarius a little bit ago. And I believe by the end of this month, we probably will see Kurz in the shop. But Horus Lupercal was in the shop. He was available for purchase. He was available to all players across the world. And many, many players who had gems who were able to save him, if they did not already have him, picked him up. And immediately, Horus Lupercal, his play rate skyrocketed. He skyrocketed for you could say quite a few reasons, but really the driving reason was the fact that he was suddenly available to all of those players. And thus the meta changed. He became part of the meta. Now, the Horus Lupercal mid-range decks that were being used, that were very consistent and very winny, I think really evolved. Let's just take a quick look here. This is just a deck I threw together, but this is not what is consistent with his deck. But those decks included, included double Bane Strike rounds, and then the old Firewalkers. Firewalkers who at the time were stealth, as well as Beast of Fyra, who did not have Maintenance 3, they had Maintenance 2. They were also available in the shop at the same time. So you suddenly have two very powerful cards available for purchase. And then you've got a strong faction in the Sons of Horus. The Bane Strike rounds are just a staple for them already. And then you throw in these neutral cards, and you've got a Warlord who at the time, Horus Lupercal, had high initiative. So you've got the option to give a stealth troop on the table that can survive what a Joker Company strike, can survive has a high chance of survival against defensive satellites, and Informant Network is just going to reveal it, and it still requires some sort of heavy follow-up action to get rid of. We can hold those in reserve, and with the massive card drawing potential of both Horus's ability and the Sons of Horus card pool, it's very easy to get your Bane Strike rounds, drop double Bane Strike rounds, and then suddenly you've got an 11 attack guy coming out of stealth. Or if your opponent cannot do anything about your Beast of Fyra on the turn that you're playing it, you still have enough energy left over on your next turn, even with their Maintenance of 2, to drop a Bane Strike round on it, and then suddenly you've got yourself an 8/5 Berserk Bloodthirst, and you're doing 16 damage. Those cards already existed in the game. Horus Lupercal already existed in the game, and there were several top players who had a Horus deck that functioned with that. And then within the course of the other cards, whether it was Groger Squad, Goldstone Hunters, whatever it was, built their Horus deck as a powerful mid-range with certain closing options, not to mention all the wonderful fun of Vengeful Spirit, Chariot of the Gods, etc., etc. But because Horus Lupercal was suddenly in possession of, let's just say 80% more of the player base. Suddenly, 80% more of the player base is not only playing with Horus because, hey, he's their new toy and he's hot to trot, but they've got these deck lists. Sons of Horus cards are, what you start the game with, and they're very powerful. They always have been, and it's not too hard to slap some stuff together on some neutrals that are available in the shop, and then suddenly everybody's playing this deck that is just cranking out crazy damage. Well, that was already there. That deck was already there previously, but because not as many people had access to it, it wasn't part of the meta. Horus was not a bad warlord. He was a winnable warlord. He had good. The deck worked exactly the same as it did the week before he went on sale in the shop, and he won the same amount of games. The difference is he was being played 80% less, and therefore he wasn't gauged as one of the top 3 warlords. Well, in the course of that, I believe it was about 3 weeks that followed that, there was a big shift. It became indicative. Everybody was griping and complaining. Oh, Horus is, gosh, these Horus decks are out of control. It was the same Horus deck that's been around. But now, because it was so prominent, because now everybody was playing it, that became part of the meta. And then they made a change. And this kind of factors into how the meta can change. And in our course of the game, Everguild, this Horus Heresy Legions, is a virtual game. So very often, as we have seen, they do, whether it is buffs or nerfs, decreases in powers, they've adjusted cards accordingly based on if they're being too powerful or if they're just not seeing enough play, and they made changes related to that. They changed Horus Lupercal's initiative to medium instead of high, which I thought was unnecessary. I still think is unnecessary, because it wasn't he that was the problem. It was Beast of Fyra and it was Firewalkers. They also made changes to those cards. They increased the Beast of Fyra maintenance to 3 instead of 2, making it impossible to follow up on that initial turn, on your 4th turn with a Banestrike round on it. And they removed the stealth from Firewalkers. So they adjusted that. As a result of that, Horus decks suddenly dropped significantly in the rate of play. And I wouldn't say he dropped out of the meta, but I think it's probably fairly safe to say that he is not a top tier 1 meta deck anymore. I think he can still function as a tier 1.5, but that's pushing it. More likely he's a tier 2, and that is mainly because of his initiative. His initiative cut really hurt him, which is unfortunate, and that's unnecessary, and I think that's a little bit swinging too hard to one side. But just in the course of that, he was part of the meta, because all of a sudden everybody's playing him, people stop playing him, and even though he functions exactly the same, he doesn't see as much play, therefore he's not part of the meta. So yes, the meta evolves. The meta is a living, breathing thing, and it can vary from either what is dominant, what is crushing the game in the course of perhaps the Thousand Suns, Psyker Energy Abuse Tools, Phosis Takar, Psyker Barrier, Magnus the Red, whatever it is that you feel that the Thousand Suns just abused the most out of, they're just crushing the game, and that's why everybody's playing them. Or the meta can also be shaped by what everybody's playing, just by simple the fact that that is the majority of what people are playing because they have access to it. The meta also changes depending on where you are at in the game. If you are on Terra, and Terra ultimately is what I'm referencing, is what Everguild references. It's really what gauges, because that's the top players, the players who are playing to win, the players who are in the top 50, the players who are playing the decks and the warlords and the cards as best as they possibly can to either exploit combos, identify combos, win. They're most likely to have access to the cards as well. That's ultimately, that is your top meta. That is your driving meta. That's your meta for the players who are really truly invested in the game. Right below that is Mars. And Mars is probably, in relation to your tiers, as we mentioned before, Mars is probably your tier 2. It's your tier 2 decks all struggling to get to Terra for various reasons, whether that's because the players in Mars don't quite have all the cards to make their deck fully functional, or they don't have the Warlord that they need to take them to the next level, or they're just comfortable playing in Mars and having fun. Then below that, I believe, is Prospero and Kolth and Isfan, and in the course of all of those are various levels of introductory play to the game, whether that is players building a collection and building their familiarity with the game and the concepts and how they go, or they're just playing for shits and fun, and they don't really, you know, they're okay with where they're at, and if they win, they win, if they lose, they lose, or they just don't have the cards, and that's where they're at, and that's okay. That there's nothing wrong with that, but that's kind of a way to help you gauge. So if you are in any of those levels, it might help you better understand what it is, what's holding you back. What is holding you back? For me, as a player, when I first started, for the longest time, because I do free to play, I paid, again, I think I paid all total maybe $30 for tickets for events. Everything else I've done has always been a free to play. So all the gold, all the gems I've done have just been accumulated through the course of playing the game. And for me, the longest obstacle that I had that took forever was getting enough cards to play another faction. I didn't even have a Warlord. I had a decent pool of Emperor's Children card. I didn't have any Emperor's Children Warlords. My first Emperor's Children Warlord was Fabius Bile, and I picked him up after, I think, a month. Well, he's not great, and at the time he was really not great. He's actually been improved since how he first was, and but it was an opportunity for me to play something other than Loken, and that was really what I needed. Is I needed something to, whether it was an extra 5 hit points or just some variety to my card pool. I had a legendary, you know, I had back in the day, it was the Lucius. He was a card, not a Warlord. I had the Lucius legendary. I didn't have any legendaries for my Sons of Horus faction, so I switched over, and I was able to jump up a level. I think I went to Kolth in there, and then I got High Kolth, maybe Prospero, and then I got Karn. And you know, you don't need a whole lot of World Eater cards with Karn, but at the same time, you have a couple, and I picked up Wraith. So I had Karn, I had New Warlord, and I had a legendary, and just like that, I was off to the races, and my game level improved. And Karn is a, you know, tier 1.5, tier 2 deck. I'd say probably tier 2. He functions a lot on luck, but people play him for a variety of factors: speed of play, ease of play, lack of thought, you know, whatever. As a new player, as my third Warlord, suddenly I was able to play, and I got all the way up to Mars with him, you know, and very consistent, came familiar. I was just playing to win. I was winning games all of a sudden. It was great because I had Karn, and for the most part, I was running into a lot of players who were just playing what I had: Fabius Bile, Loken, Saul Tarvitz. That was it. Garrow, his ability and the stuff at the time, he's not who he was now, and he was not good then. So nobody played him, and then occasionally you'd run into a Primarch. At the time, the worst Primarch to run into, especially as Karn, was Angron, because Angron had his original ability. He was just attack 3. That was it. It was attack 3 Berserk. There was no conditional. He didn't lower his attack, so he was just always attack 3, which is just ridiculous. And there was players that had him, and those were just matches that I just lost as Karn. And then I got Fulgrim. It was my first Primarch. And then I was able to make it to Terra, because then I switched back to the Emperor's Children. I had picked up Pride of the Emperor. My collection grew. My legendary card pool grew. My ability to understand the game and play perfection grew. And suddenly I went from, you know, from one level to the next level. That's the evolution of play. How does that relate to the meta is basically how I played through the meta of low tier, new player level, to mid tier, to growing my collection to be able to break into the higher tiers. Now, still, once I got into Terra, I still lacked, you know, quite a few cards for all the various factions, and just through the course of time, gradually built up and made my deck stronger. and made, my play with Fulgrim stronger, and built a deck that incorporated what I knew and what I could operate with, as well as what was good. And then the Istvan 5 set came out, and the Raven Guard came out, and the Salamanders and Iron Hands, and I was lucky enough to pick up Korax early on, and just like that, I was on top of the meta. And when I say on top of the meta, is basically if you are able to jump in on what is new right off the bat, new mechanic, new concept, new decks that people are not as familiar playing. For months, players had played the same World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Sons of Horus decks over and over and over again. Very few people were playing Death Guard. Very few. There were people. Some people were, but just very few. Durak Rask, I think, was the only Death Guard really truly seen play at that point in time. So everybody's playing those decks. They know those decks. They know those matchups. And all of a sudden, here comes Raven Guard faction. Because, again, nobody was playing the Iron Hands. Contrary to what the various Facebook posts and shop reviews would indicate, that apparently these Iron Hand faction is just overpowered. Regardless of what the Venerable Comac upgrade was, seems to indicate that they were needing that. Nobody was playing them. Salamanders were not seen as much play because they were not in a good state. A lot of their cards that they have now currently were much less powerful, much less functional on a variety of things. But then you've got this faction that can do stealth more so than any other faction can. You've got a faction who can do unstoppable. They've got an unstoppable warlord. They've got a lot of unstoppable units. They've got the sentenced mechanic as well as, and they've got the ability to draw a lot of cards with their tactics. They have a combo potential, which in general appealed to me. But that alone, with players not knowing it, not understanding how to operate against it, not understanding how to play against it, threw people off. And in the course of a very short time, if you don't evolve with it, you fall behind, you get confused, you lose more games. What worked for you for 2 months suddenly isn't working anymore. The meta evolves. And if you are lucky enough to be at one of those people who have the cards and the decks and the concepts in your mind, and you're playing you're playing what is now evolved past what everybody else is playing, you're at the top. You're on top of the meta change. You're in a good position. That's where you want to be. That's where you want to be if you want to win. Number one. Number two, if you want to be here. Number three, if you want to feel as if you are creating something and you're not frustrated. You're not losing. If you feel as if, man, all these players just have always got these things and they've always come up with these things, and how am I supposed to win? That's not a fun feeling, but that's also an indicative, an indication to you that you aren't on top of the meta. And that's not terrible. You can make that change. You just have to understand how. Let me take a drink here for a second. Maybe that's what I need. I need some water. Ugh. Now, obviously, the meta has shifted from Raven Guard to Alpha Legion, and then from Alpha Legion to Thousand Suns and Night Lords, and I mean, it's a constantly evolving thing. That's part of the game. That's part of it's part of any collectible card game. There's always something new. Doesn't mean that what is old doesn't work. It just has its own struggles, and at the same time, people are very used to it. At a certain point, people became very familiar with how to play against stealth decks, how to play against Raven Guard. They knew what they had to do to avoid certain things. They knew at certain points, okay, now most likely your turn 5, okay, he's going to play this card. I better be prepared for it. Turn 2, I put out a troop. He's most likely got a scimitar jet bikes, so I'm going to try to bait that out. First time that somebody plays that scimitar jet bikes against you and freaks you out and blows you away, well, you tend to remember that. That's just players getting smarter and stronger, but that's part of the meta too. It's an evolving process. to go with that, I guess is how to play the meta. Is we talked about what the meta is. Then how do you play the meta? How do you meta play? Meta play is basically, I don't want to say the opposite side of the coin in what a meta is, but it is basically how you deal with the meta. So let's go back to our example currently. And this is something that it always evolves, just in the same way as the meta evolves. How you deal with the meta evolves as well, based off of what you have access to, based off of what you want to play, and based off of what you are seeing the most. Because meta decking, or meta decking is probably let's just call it meta decking, is basically taking what you are going to face and saying, okay, you know what, I encounter Magnus decks 70% of the time. I'm tired of it. I'm going to build a deck that is just, I think, is going to do the best it can possibly do against Magnus, because I'm tired of it. And every time I'm playing Magnus, he's always spamming tactics on me. So what do? Well, the game has introduced a few cards through the course of its lifetime that can help you deal with tactics. I'll just pull up a deck here. This is not a meta deck, but this is just a fun little deck thing that I've done. Wow, look at that. 0 tactics. What was I thinking? This is probably, I think I ended up doing this for something here. I don't know why, because I thought I had 1 tactic in here. 0 tactics, double shield generators. Okay, that's a little extreme. I'm just pumping out troops. That's all I'm doing is pumping out troops. And then I've used Pyramid of Photep to pump up some tactics, I guess. And I'm just trying to get crazy with it. And I'm using Decima to stun that Warlord so he's not using that ability on me. You could go that route. You could go, did I have another one here? I think I had 6. I think I did 6. Oh, no, I did, this one here is a fucking, sorry, excuse my language. Here's another deck that is designed to just annoy, double orbital combats, shield generator, and then I think I've got the, I don't have it in this iteration, but the Edict of Censure, are just really hard anti-tactic stuff. If that's what you're encountering, you build something like that. You include those cards. You could include Learning a Hydra, things that make it harder for your opponent to play tactics. They're still going to be able to play tactics by the nature of the game, but you increase the cost of them if that's really what you're encountering. Are you encountering a tactic of Magnus consistently? Then introduce concepts, evolve your game, create a deck. Use these deck slots. Use them. They're for you. They're for you. Use these deck slots for your own good. And create some decks, create some alternatives that says, you know what? That's what I face. I'm going to break it. I'm going to play things that's going to make it hard for him to do. Now, you go too far to one extreme, you're not going to win against anything else. Therein lies a problem. If you're playing a bunch of stealth decks, if you're running up against stealth decks and you include all the anti-stealth cards in your deck, you might be overdoing it. And then suddenly you come across a deck like a Salamander's deck that has no stealth in it. There might be 3 or 4 card slots in there that you wish you had not used an anti-stealth for, because it's not going to do you any good against a Numian deck. That's just balance. That's deck building. And at some point, maybe I'll do something. We'll talk about deck building a little bit more. But that's meta decking. That's the meta. So the meta is evolving. The meta is, you know how on, go back to like the Super Friends. Way back yonder, the Super Friends, and there was Apache Chief, and there was Giganta. And it always was comical to me, because every time all the superheroes would fight, Batman would fight Joker, Superman would fight Lex Luthor, Green Lantern would fight Sinestro. These are all comic characters who had classic villains. I don't know where Apache Chief and Giganta came from. I think they were just for the cartoon. But, Giganta would get big. And then Apache would go, and he would get big. And they would both be big and they would fight, even though they were just fighting. They were just the same size. I mean, they didn't have to get big to fight each other, but they did. But that's how they mashed up. And one deck gets really big. Your stealth deck gets really big. Another deck evolves to get just as big to fight it. And they fight. But they're just fighting each other. They're not fighting everything else. Well, the meta isn't just 2 decks. The meta is all these warlords as part of it. And just like in the course of an episode of the Super Friends, where suddenly somebody comes up with the ideas like, wait a minute, let's swap enemies. And then suddenly Batman fights the Joker, or Batman fights, Lex Luthor, and Superman fights Sinestro, and Green Lantern fights Cheetah, and Wonder Woman fights Giganta, and suddenly the enemies don't know what to do because they've never fought this person before, and they're confused and they're beaten. That's how you metagame. That's how you throw things off. That's how you get on top of the meta. You come across a deck that people aren't used to. I use Falk as a combo deck, but I used him for the last 2 months, and when everybody was raging about Magnus and Phosis, Falk, while by the nature of the combo deck, he was live or die, but he never had a problem with playing with those warlords so long as my combo went off. But as time went on, I think people got used to that and realized that, okay, at this point I have to get lucky with my mortar strikes, or I have got to put up, I've got to hold my Mechatur Cabal squad for this point, so it makes it hard for him to use his veterans. Whatever the case it was, the things evolved. But for that time being, those matchups were not as hard for me because I changed my build. I changed my outlook. I changed what I was using. I changed it mainly just because that's what I do. Every 2 months I play one warlord to death, basically, through the course of the season. That's just my own personal thing. But if I was facing somebody consistently, like when I was Comrade Kurz, I think I faced I'm trying to think who was the hardest matchup for me with Comrade Kurz. It's hard to say. Maybe Erlin might have been a hard matchup. I saw a lot of Alfarius, but that wasn't really so hard for me. Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to remember back because it was like 4 months ago. I'm trying to remember back what was really giving me a hard time, but it was probably either Alfarius or Angron. And with Angron, with my Kurz deck, there's just some cards that were not going to do me any good. Having my Recon Claw out there, what good is flanking going to do against Angron? It's not going to do anything. My power cards that were really game winning for me was getting out my Reapers of Kaldrak at the right times. Slapping can't attack on Angron. As well as getting my Mercy and Forgiveness and finding a way to hold off, not attacking directly, but holding off to the point where I can either have my heavy hitters or I can go into my madness and keep myself alive a little bit longer. But there are plenty of games against Angron where I would have 2 Rules of Fear in my hand, completely dead cards. Cards that are not going to do me any good whatsoever, and just irritating me, sitting in my hand. So a talent for murder against Angron is completely worthless if he's not running troops. So it was aimed to beat everything else. It was aimed to beat Alpha Legion. It was aimed to beat Garrow, which was kind of, I think, going around at the time. What else was probably seeing play? I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Maybe I think Lucius And Lucius might have been getting played, maybe some Perturabo. So I mean, it was good against those matches, but against Angron, it was harder. What was really hard against was Mandragorax, because Mandragorax, most of those decks could consistently put up pressure, and I had a lot of stealth units. Well, Mandro can put out some damage, and he in of himself can just meta by the simple fact that he's got his ability, and he can include all these cards to just do crazy damage. Spread damage, random damage, which, even though it's random, that's probably your most meta choice of cards, because it's going to hit everything regardless. Somehow, some way, it's going to hit everything, baby. So those, I think I only beat a Mandro deck as Kurz like maybe 2 or 3 times. And those were hard, and those were only like if I got a Manifest Destiny on or something, because he could just consistently lower my health way faster than I could get anything on board to help me out with. Putting Can Attack on Mandragorax doesn't do anything, you know. So that's how you play the meta. That's how you play the meta is basically you take a look at your deck or your Warlord and you say, this isn't working for me. This isn't working for me. What do I have to do? Well, you can do 2 things. You can complain about it and not change your deck at all. Or you change your deck and you try something new. If you are on Discord or your own chat or occasionally in the lodge, let's just go to the general chat. Let's just take a look here. Yeah, there's issues with the replay. I did a fun little Underverse Warp Retreat loop. Took me like 8 or 9 games to do it, and I finally got it off, and the replay is bugged because apparently this is the first I've seen it happen, where if the game creates random cards, I've seen it twice now with Olympia. Here there was an opponent created Olympia, and then it created random troops in the bot's hand. Well, in the replay it created different random troops in their hand, which bugged the replay, and then the game stopped. And then I had it happen once before where opponents played in the normal game, played one of many and transformed into Exodus as a secret identity. Well, in the replay generated a completely different secret identity, and they generated into Alfarius, and then they had 5 additional health at the end of the game, so the game ends with them sitting at 5 health when they were KO'd. So they need to work on that. That's a completely sidebar here. But, you know, you might see people sometimes complaining in the lodge here that some things are just hard. You might see that on the... right now, a lot of people are talking about Amon, which I don't have Amon. I'll probably get him in about a week or 2 whenever he's in the shop. But he is very, very easily something that could be on top of the meta for a while until he's adjusted. If you're in Discord, you'll see people about that occasionally complaining that they just have hard times beating these decks. What do? These decks always win. Magnus is just so hard to beat. And, you know, some of the complaints are not terribly invalid. For instance, when there was Vengeance Garrow, and for players who don't understand what Vengeance Garrow was, who haven't played the game long enough, just a quick overview here. Vengeance Garrow was a moment when they first tweaked, well, I can't say when they first, this was like the 3rd change that they made to Garrow. They finally changed his ability to gain this after putting a troop in play, connect again. His ability was exactly as it is now. But what they didn't do, or they didn't think about, is Vengeance didn't have your Warlord gets +3/+0 and sneak attack on the next attack this turn. It was just your Warlord gets +3/+0 and sneak attack this turn. So very quickly, you could wait till you had about 5 or 6 energy, and then spam 3, you could play Vengeance, and then spam 3 troops that cost 1 and deal 20 damage. 5, 10, 15, 20 damage on turn 4 or 5, which was just ridiculous. Well, that's what Vengeance Garrow is. So if you ever hear me refer to Vengeance Garrow or somebody in a chat, that's what Vengeance Garrow was. That is a point where he was clearly imbalanced. Clearly, they needed to take action. He could be beaten, but basically everybody was just playing Vengeance Garrow to fight Vengeance Garrow. That was how the meta evolved. Some guy got taller. Giganta got taller. So everybody else either decided to be Giganta or be the deck that could beat him, which I think Korax was probably your best bet. Because he could hide. That was it. He was the only one he could stealth. That was the only way he was going to survive if he could. And it was just a matter of biding time at that point. Because if they drew that vengeance and they had the troops in hand, it just was not going to be pretty for you. So in that regard, it was clearly imbalanced, and Everguild stepped in. They made those changes. They tweaked Vengeance, and that's one of the wonderful aspects of having a digital game is they can make those changes. They don't have to ban a card. They don't have to, create 5 new cards just to deal with one specific card that is just completely imbalancing the game. They can just go back and tweak how the card works. They can tweak how Magnus's ability works. They can tweak how Phosis Dakar works, how the Psychic Barrier works. They can make these changes to the game itself, and all we have to do is adjust accordingly. But you either adjust to beat it and say, this is what's challenging for me. This is what I'm running up against. I'm having a hard time with guys who are stealthing. I'm having a hard time against Kurz. God damn it, every time I fight Kurz, I lose. Okay, well, what do you have to answer Kurz in your deck? Well, let's just take a look. And this is not your standard. I don't know if this is your standard Kurz deck or not, but, what deck are you playing? Are you playing a deck that has any anti-stealth? How much anti-stealth do you have? Because guaranteed, either after Kurz goes into madness or via his troops, he's going to have stealth in his deck at some point in time. So do you have anti-stealth? If you don't, there's your problem. You need to have some anti-stealth. If you don't have anti-stealth, there's one thing to do about it. If the second thing is, well, I've got some anti-stealth, but it's not enough, well, then add more. If it's truly that big of a problem, don't go crazy. You don't have to add all 8 cards that deal with stealth into your deck, but you do need to figure out what do you need. Do you add this Skitarii Protector, which is a fairly good one to add to counter Kurz, and especially now that he's a 5/5 as opposed to a 4/5. That's nice, and he's a front line. Okay, that's not a bad thing. Arcadia's is probably not a great thing to do because he's just going to be able to sneak attack those guys right off the bat. But you know who I really enjoy right now? It's a new card. Is these Secretary Peltasts. These are great. He goes into stealth mode. Great. I'll deal 2 damage to you and I'll stun you. What do you got now? What do you got now, Kurz? You can't hide in your next turn. You evolve your game. Part of this is because they created a new card, and second, because you decide that it is worth putting in your game for that matchup specifically. Or, Korax, or at the time when people were playing Horus with their Firewalkers, I loved dropping a Peltast and delaying them a turn with that. You make those choices. You say, I can see that this is going to be a problem. I'm going to put cards in my deck that counter that problem. I can see that you playing tactics is a problem, and it's not so much for me. I'm going to throw down a shield generator. Screw you. Screw your tactics. Phosis Dakar doesn't mind doing that. He can throw a shield generator behind his barriers and then just put out troops. And then he's protecting his troops from your tactics that you're spamming. Your Octo now costs 6, and he can drop this off the turn before that. Oh, man, I played, I don't know if it was an event or a practice game, and I was ready to drop my Ragnarok and then with 9 energy, and then he threw down a second shield generator, and I was like, God damn it. I can't do that now. It costs 11 energy. So, that's the nature of the game. Shield generator is just such a great card in the right deck. But you make those choices. You play the meta. You meta deck. You basically say, these are what I'm going to include. Not just because, this is a good card. Pi Alpha is the only card right now, and I hope they change this. I've hoped this for a while. They need to add more cards that deal with stun. This is the only card that deals with stun. If stun is a problem for you, whether that is because your Warlord is an aggro Warlord like Angron, Leman Russ, Garrow, whatever the case is, there's no reason why you shouldn't have 2 of these in your deck. Period. First off, they heal 3. Second, they remove stun. And if it's that big of a problem for you, then you need to have this card in your deck. Period. End of story. That's the only option that you have. Your other option is to not have it in your deck at all and then get annoyed and pissed off every time you get stunned. Well, if you're not doing anything to fix it, then you're not making the changes that you need to make. And then that's one reason why you have not ascended. Or you've got a Pi Alpha, and then you just have to know how to play it. And that's more technical, playing like, because you're only going to have 2 of them. So depending on what the matchup is, you might say, yeah, is it worth it? I'll hold on to it. I'll stay stunned this turn to help myself get unstunned next turn. But that's more a strategy thing. But the point is this is the only card currently that deals with stun. So Mortarion does, but that's just, he's a Warlord, so you can't put Mortarion in your deck. So if stun's a problem, that's what you do. If stealth is a problem, you do something like this. You've got Informant Network as well. You've got random damage as well. If you've got tactics are a problem, this is just a mechanical card pool. This isn't counting your Legion specific card pool, but there are cards that deal with things. You say, I'm tired of it. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to throw shit in here that's going to deal with whatever problem it is that I'm having. If you don't do that, then you accept your deck as it is. You're not meta decking, and then you are just playing the game as it stands. There's nothing wrong with that unless you're complaining about it and not doing anything. It's the typical, like, okay, well, do something about it. The game is giving us tools to do it. The game gives you deck slots to do it, to make these decks, baby. If you have a problem and you want to really just play one Warlord, and that's all you want to do is just play one Warlord, then you know what? Build 20 different deck slots for that one Warlord for all the various iterations. All right, this is my anti-stealth Malkarian. This is my anti-Angron Malkarian. I'm coming across a whole lot of frontline today. I'm going to bring out my frontline busting Malkarian. Just using that as an example. There's a good middle ground in between that. Without trying to lose my thought, because I was just thinking about a Malkarian deck all of a sudden. But you've got to evolve. You've got to evolve to play the meta, and that's really what that is you as a player evolving. The meta is what everybody collectively is playing, whether that is because what they have access to, or whether that is because what is winning, or is a second level, like, hey, you know what, everybody's playing Alfarius because Alfarius was in the shop on April Fool's Day. Now everybody has Alfarius, and you know what, the Alpha Legion cards are pretty good, and Harrowing is a rare as opposed to a legendary, so everybody's got access to that, and it's pretty easy to make your opponent draw cards. Okay, let's play Alfarius, let's play Alpha Legion. Everybody's doing it? Okay, cool. Oh, check it out. Now we've all got Horus Lupercal, and we can play this deck that has been around for 4 months. Let's do it. Okay, oh, everybody's playing this horse deck. That's really annoying. They need to make changes, and they make those changes for you. The game has changed. The meta has changed because all the players have changed and the game has changed. But if you are not changing to stay one step ahead, man, everybody's playing this Horus deck. Well, I need to find something that beats Horus. What beats Horus? I'll tell you what, Falk beats Horus. He beat Horus pretty good, because before Horus could get out his wonderful Firewalkers double combo, I could get out my Vets Harsh Discipline Harsh Discipline Fault combo and close that game pretty quick. If I didn't get my combo, I didn't get my combo. That's the way the game works. But still had a pretty good time doing it. Conjurador, Viral Bombs, Rack and Ruin. Did pretty good. Didn't have too many problems with Falk, because I found a deck that could work faster and harder. Higher risk against certain matchups. What were the big matchups that I had problems with? I had problems with Angron, Angron was a 50-50 because he could just pump out fast damage faster than I could get some stuff set up. I had problems against Shuriken and Korax, who could time and stealth and avoid when I wanted to hit them hardest. That's the nature of it. I think I had a couple anti-stealth, but I mean, I was going all in for one specific thing. That's the way it works. I didn't meta against Horus, but I found a deck and I made sure that I put 2 or 3 cards in there that helped me function better against Horus. I played the meta. I meta decked. Currently, if you have Phosis and he is a problem, you've got to find yourself some unstoppable troops. You've got to find yourself some stuff that does damage as well across the board, or straight damage to the Warlord. Phosis Takara can put up all the barriers he wants, but you know what? If Erlen keeps punching him in the face for 3 life each turn, rips his face off, it's going to be a pretty short game, and Erlen goes first in that matchup every time. You make that choice. You meta deck. You say, this is the choice I'm doing. I'm tired of coming across Phosis. I'm playing Erlen, and I'm going to win. I don't know. I mean, you could still potentially lose, but it's a favored matchup there. That's, as a player, you are meta decking. So the meta is Phosis, Magnus, Russ, and Valdor. You, as a player, aren't playing any of those 3 because you don't have access to those legendary warlords. Then you play the meta. And then, as a result of you playing the meta and playing Erlen, then somewhere down the road, whether it's through the introduction of 1 or 2 new cards, or just Phosis players getting tired of having their face ripped off, they make changes to adjust accordingly. Maybe they don't play Phosis anymore. Maybe they change to incorporate a little bit more healing or something to deal with some stunning. There's probably like only a couple neutral stun cards that would be good in that matchup. But they incorporate something as well to deal with the Erlen threat. Well, then they're playing the meta, and the game and the meta evolve, and that's okay. That's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. To kind of go all the way back, if the meta is not evolving, if it remains stagnant, if nothing changes, then players lose interest, and then you lose players, and then you have a game that nobody's playing. So it's very important, and it's okay. It's okay to make those changes. You have to break out of your comfort zone. You have to. Take advantage of these deck slots. Do it for me, but do it for yourself too. Not just because you have the Warlord and you want to try him out, but because some Warlords are just better in certain matchups for certain reasons. Some Warlords are going to be top tier because of their whatever the current iteration is, whether it's because of Psycho Energy, or it's because of Ward, or it's because of Stealth, or whatever it is. They're going to be top tier at that moment. It's okay to play those if you have access to them, if you want to win, if you want to be part of that. If you don't, because it's not fashionable, or you want to run against the grain, and there are players who do that all the time, that's a topic for a whole different video. That's okay too. But pick something that's going to operate well against them, at least. Find a Warlord that, if you're going to run the contrary to the grain against, it's still going to do a good job. Mandro can still work fairly decently against Phosis, so long as you can keep his board low. Iron Hands might be getting there now with the hammer, the changes to the hammer. That's the only thing I agree with. Santar might be able to make that work. I don't know. We'll see. But evolve. That's the big thing. So the meta is the game as a whole. What's top? What's not? What's winning? What's played? Playing the meta is you as a player evolving. Making the choices within what deck you're using and what cards are going into your deck to face those matchups that you keep encountering. And that's probably about the best I can do to explain it. And again, it's a very abstract concept. And I'm sorry to have gone on at length about it. Part of it was my mind waking up, and the other part is me trying to figure out the best way to put it into words. And I hope that works out for you. I hope that explains some things to you a little bit. And it's not It's not something you can simply show with 1 or 2 games. But if you're playing this game, you know what you're facing. If you've had discussions and you're seeing replays in your lodges, you know what your lodge mates are seeing. That's what it is. There's nothing wrong with making a meme deck of Nemetor and look at what my Nemetor did. Look how fun it is. And I won. I beat this guy. I did this. I pulled off my Underverse combo. God damn it. It took me 9 games to do that. It was great. There's nothing wrong with that for that own personal satisfaction challenge. But that's not going to do anything to answer what the meta is. It's not going to do anything to improve my win rate against what is dominating and what players are playing. There's nothing wrong with playing for fun. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. That's why they have the practice mode in there. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't feel bad about that. But if you want to feel better about winning or losing, it helps to understand what the meta is. It helps to understand that it's okay that the meta changes. And I hope you embrace the fact, if you don't already, that it's okay to make changes to yourself and your decks in order to win, because that's actually a natural progression of the game. And I'm not just talking Horus Heresy Legions, I'm talking card games in general. Collectible card games in general, that is an inherent natural concept. Even if it's a living card game, when I say living card game, that's a term where they don't have, you just buy a pack and you have all the cards in the pack. In each pack, there's new cards. So it's still it's still evolving. There's still new things being added. Even in those concepts, you still have a meta because you still have new things introduced that people have to incorporate to either play against or to play with. So with all that being said, and that being quite a mouthful, and it now being 12:39 a.m. on August 11th, I'm going to leave you guys with those thoughts. I hope those are helpful. I hope those are educational. If they're not, then you probably shouldn't have sat through about an hour of me talking to myself, because you probably already have a fair understanding as far as what the meta is. But maybe you want to hear what I think the meta is. I don't know. Yes, there you go. See, here's a perfect example here. So many Bolvi in the ladder. And Mortarion does a great job on that, because you can stun Bolvi. Bolvi cannot use his ability. And any troops that he's dropping, oh, baby, you can poison them with Death Cloud. You can endurance them. You've got your front line. And he's just going to be throwing out weak guys. There's nothing that he can do about it with his stun Warlord. That's a perfect example of meta, or a meta choice. Because, you know, I don't know if Guard Buddy's running Mortarion the entire time. Maybe he's been running Mortarion this entire month and he's at 3,900. I don't know. But in that specific matchup, that is a perfect example of a Warlord-focused deck. Your Angron deck, your to an extent, your Rust deck, and then a choice to take Mortarion and shut that down. And then your deck that is Warlord-focused has to become troop or tactic-focused. How well is that going to work? So, all right. Well, that being said, I'm going to try to go back to sleep and pass out on my floor again, because apparently that floor is really comfortable, especially after a couple beers. It's just like you just lay down and you're just like, oh, I didn't know this floor could be so cush. And then you wake up like 6 hours later and you're like, oh my God, that floor is not cush at all. My back. All right. That's it for me, guys. Let me know what you think. Put some comments out there. What do you think the meta is? What is the meta to you? I really want to hear what people think, because I'll tell you what, I don't get enough comments and I feel lonely. But no, realistically, what does the meta mean to you? What are your thoughts on it? Have I covered it all? Have I covered it the best way I possibly can? Have you learned something from it? Do you disagree? I love having discussions, whether it is on the chat or in Discord. If you're on Discord, I love player discussions. That's what I can't say that's what I live for, but that's what a lot of my time on Discord is for, looking up and engaging with players, and I really enjoy it. So I hope this was something useful for you, and I hope I hear from you. And with that being said, have a good Sunday, and keep playing Legions.
Alright, that wraps it up for me. If you liked what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe, add any comments below, and if you think the video might be useful or the series might be useful, feel free to share that with other players that you know as well. And we'll talk to you later.